There we go.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. We're on the air whenever you're ready to begin.
Sounds great. Then I will say, let us begin the meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission for November 17th. If we can all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation
under God, indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. David, do you want to give us our television announcement?
Yes, thank you. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Samaria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays after 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download in a day or two. Would you like me to move on to roll call, Mr. Chair?
Yes, please.
Great. Commissioner Police.
Here.
Commissioner Keller.
Here.
Commissioner Senauer.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
And Chair Kupiec.
Here.
Thank
Well,
you.
we're all here. Great. So Jeff, do you want to talk about the COVID-19 state of emergency status?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, item 5 on your agenda today is related to providing direction to staff to continue holding remote hearings and to make those findings that there's continued need for us to observe social distancing, physical distancing, and to keep the meetings remote. And so at this time, we're asking the commission to give us direction to continue remote hearings in December. So that would be item 5.
Do we need to vote on that matter?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, we would ask for a motion to be made and a vote on giving staff direction to continue to hold remote hearings in December.
Do I hear a motion on the floor?
Yes. I so move to continue on a monthly basis remote hearings and to have it, as the language states, renewed or revisited monthly. Thank you.
I second the motion.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Police.
Aye.
Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Aye.
Commissioner Senauer.
Aye.
Commissioner Miller.
Aye.
Chair Kupiec.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. David, an agenda status report?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I'll move forward with the agenda status report. There's one item on consent, which is the Casa Drinda Open Space annual status report or update to the commission. And then there are 3 items listed on the standard agenda. We have the first item, which was a continuance from an earlier hearing, which is the Meridero lot split. And then we have a zoning variance and a CDH on a gatehouse off of Edgecliff Lane. And then we have a briefing by Mr. Clemon from Long Range Planning Division in regards to our coordination and update on where we're at with the sea level rise local coastal program amendment. That in staff's ready and available on all those items to present today.
Great. Jeff, thank you. We will open the floor to public comment for any items that are not on the standard agenda as of today. Do we have any speaker slips?
We do not have anyone for anything at this point, so no public comment at this time.
I will close public comment and move on to the Planning Commissioner's informational reports.
Mr. Chair, if I could interrupt,
Sure.
Can we go back to item number 7, the projection report? There's a couple things I want to
I'm sorry. Yeah, sure.
get direction with the commission on. Mr. Chair, on the projection report, a couple things of coordination that I'd like to get direction from the commission today on is regards to our next hearing is scheduled for December 15th. Currently, we have noted that Commissioner Keller will be absent that day, and there is one item listed, which is an update on the safety element vulnerability assessment. And then we did get a request yesterday about adding a briefing on SB 9 to that date as well. And then, however, we're asking the commission on the December 15th date to consider a couple options. The option is to move forward with that hearing with both of those briefing items listed. And then in addition, we will need to, again in December, make that same finding that we just did in regards to COVID-19 and remote hearings. The request is that on that same hearing, we're asking if the commission could work with me with the County Planning Commission to make some adjustments on the schedule to have the County Planning Commission have a special hearing on that same day, because they need to make that same COVID-19 finding in December for their meetings in January. So we wanted to have a double header that day with the Montecito Planning Commission, the County Planning Commission. So here's the request. If the Montecito Planning Commission wants to go forward with those two briefing items on that date, as well as making the finding, we would ask that the commission adjust the hearing schedule to 9:30 and let the County Planning Commission meet at 9, just so they can meet quickly to make the findings for COVID-19 and remote hearings for January, and then they would adjourn. And then we would start the Montecito Planning Commission at 9:30. The other option is if the Montecito Planning Commission does not want to have those briefings in December and wants to move them to January, then we still need to meet in December for the Montecito Planning Commission to make that COVID-19 finding. So if that is the direction, then we would have the Montecito Planning Commission go first for a half hour, make the COVID-19 findings, and then County Planning Commission would follow second. So those are the two options for the December hearing. So the staff's looking for direction on their discussion on those December hearing.
I mean, to make this quick, I'm going to propose that we just do the 9:30 meeting and keep the meeting as you know, the agenda as defined.
Would you mind acknowledging my raised hand?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because this is speaking selfishly, because I cannot attend the full meeting on the 15th. I am loading in my set to the Libero Theater, and so I will be otherwise occupied. But I could take a very brief meeting by iPhone, just to make the finding about January. And so I would like to suggest that we have a very brief meeting in December with the county, which is only having a brief meeting to make that finding, and then we postpone everything to January, which, because we have nothing else scheduled for January, and it's usually the date of our elections, it would be good if we had something else to do in January beside the election of new leadership. So that would be my preference if that is something everybody else would consider. Thank you.
I mean, I'm fine with that. Commissioner Senauer?
Yes, thanks. Jeff, do we have anything on January? It doesn't, their projection report, is there anything sort of in the pipeline that might, as far as the project goes?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer, at this time, we don't have anything projected for January. We would know probably within the next couple of weeks. I'm checking with staff currently to see if we have anything for January. There may be potentially a telecom item we might be trying to get for January, but I have to go back and look on that.
Okay. Thank you. My thoughts are similar to Commissioner Keller's. And I think January with the two informational hearings plus elections plus perhaps a project would be entirely appropriate to have December as a very short meeting to consider our monthly renewal. That's sort of where I stand on it. Thank you.
I see no other hands raised. I mean, I'm happy to push the heavy meeting into January and continue just the short meeting on the December 15th schedule. Jeff, if we meet in December 15th, it would still be at 9:30.
So Chair Kupiak and commissioners, if the commission's desires to push those briefings to January, I'd recommend we just meet at 9 o'clock at our regularly scheduled hearing for a half hour, make the COVID-19 findings, and then we'll schedule the County Planning Commission to come in at 9:30 to make their findings.
I have a question, if I may, Bob.
Yeah, sure, Ron.
So you can't make a determination now to make a decision and vote for more than 1 month at a time? Is that how this works? 'Cause I thought we've been operating under a long, was it an annual situation? Or, I mean, could we not say something like for the next 2 months, we're going to do this? Or why do we have to meet every month to make that comment if we have nothing else to meet for except for that?
Commissioner Police, and through the chair, the way the state law reads is there's a 30-day clock for every, so we have to make this finding every 30 days. And so
Okay.
for the County Planning Commission, they're falling just short of that 30 days for their January hearing. So they're gonna have to set a special hearing on the 15th of December. And so the Montecito Planning Commission, being that we meet monthly, every month you have to make that same finding.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
So, I apologize, Chair.
Go ahead.
So just to wrap it up. So Chair, I'm understanding that we're going to reschedule those 2 briefing items to January. We'll meet at 9:00 on the 15th to make the findings. It'll be a very brief hearing only to make those findings. We won't go through the administrative agenda. It'll just be to meet, make the findings, and then we'll conclude on the 15th and adjourn to January. And then we'll have the County Planning Commission come in right after you at 9:30.
Sounds like a plan.
And then just to wrap up the rest of the projection report, as we talked about, there are no other items projected. Now, January, we'll have those 2 briefing items and potentially another project. And then February, you don't have anything projected this time on the projection report. So that concludes the projection report, Mr. Chair. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And, just so that we stay in sequence, we'll open and close public comment almost immediately since there is none, and get back on track with our planning commissioners' informational reports. Do we have any reports from our planning commissioners for items of interest? I see Donna Senauer. Commissioner Senauer.
Hi. I would just like to note that it is today the Coastal Commission, which will be archived, they're meeting shortly thereafter, today actually, but they are addressing sea level rise. Their draft sea level rise regarding public tidelands, et cetera. There are 2 good reports, and I would recommend they are informational, but they can inform us going forward with this extraordinarily issue of import. So just FYI, that's just informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Senauer. It's a critically important subject, considering that I think it was 85 degrees on the beach last week while I was away. Too bad for me. But actually, in the latter months of November, latter weeks of November and mid-November, Europe was unquestionably warmer than it should have been. I'm not complaining, but at least for this one brief time, but I think that this is a vital issue to all of us.
Pardon me. What was that date of the meetings? That is for the planning, for the Coastal Commission?
It's today, Wednesday, first thing, which will probably be around between 9:30 and 11, but it is archived generally, the meeting every day immediately following their conclusion to their meeting. So you can probably get to it right away. They're usually done around 4 or 5, and you can just zero in on the 2 reports. One's by Dr. Lester, who used to be the ED of CCC and is associated with the University of California at Santa Barbara and their Marine Science Division. So both reports will be very informative, and you can watch the reports and the discussion at your leisure. Thank you.
Great. Seeing no other hands, I will move on to the minutes of the meeting of October 20th. Do we have any comments from the commission or a motion to approve? An hour.
Yes, I move to approve the minutes of October 20th, 2021.
And I second that motion.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Police,
Aye.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Senauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Chair Kupiec.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
We can have our director's report. Lisa here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the
Morning.
commission. I have a fairly short report here today. We appreciate you taking the motion to continue the remote meetings while we're trying to determine what's going to happen with case rates and COVID during the holiday season and the winter. Our offices are open, but we're doing everything by appointment still. People can set appointments virtually as well, or they can call in or email. I think I mentioned maybe at our last meeting that we do have a survey on our website about how the virtual appointment process is working and whether or not our counter services are meeting the needs of the community. And so if you hear of people with questions about it or concerns, I would encourage you to have them take that survey so we can get the feedback and make adjustments as necessary. I did want to let you know that the Long Range Planning Division last week presented to the Board of Supervisors the Climate Change Vulnerability Assessment, which is the first phase of the safety element. And it basically summarizes where our vulnerable populations and our vulnerable assets are. And it's the background document that we will be using as we move to the next phase of the safety element update, which is adaptation planning. So it's really an important document explaining where we have our vulnerabilities, where those populations are living, and what assets could be in trouble with climate change. And it's not just sea level rise. I mean, there's things like fire and flood and, mudslides, those types of things. So there's a lot of different risks that create vulnerabilities for our community. And they received and filed that report. And then we have future board items. None are associated with Montecito projects, but I will go through them. We have an appeal of the Cresco Cannabis Project in Carpinteria on the 7th of December. We have the Oasis Project, which is Senior Center in Orcutt, also on the 7th of December. And then we have the Bien Nacido appeal on the 14th of December. It's a cannabis appeal. And then the Santa Barbara Ranch Periodic Review appeal, which is the appeal of the director's determination that they were in compliance with their development agreement. I did want to let you know that at our last meeting with the County Planning Commission, in lieu of doing something for the holidays, and we haven't been able to do that for quite some time now, we would like to, I'm going to be working with John Park, we'd like to have a barbecue, outdoor barbecue, somewhere in the center of the county, probably like Lake Kachuma or Live Oak Campground or something like that, sometime in the spring. So I will keep you posted on the planning for that event. It'd be nice to get all the commissioners together in an outdoor setting like that. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Lisa, thank you.
Thank you.
I look forward to that springtime event. That'd be great.
Yeah, I hope you all have a nice holiday over Thanksgiving.
You too.
Thanks.
Is there any, do we have to open public comment for any items on the consent agenda? I know there's no public comment pending, but if not, I think we can move on to our standard agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I would just have the record reflect that you did call for public comment on the consent agenda.
I will call for public comment, and seeing that there is none, I will close public comment and move forward to item C1, the Casa Dorinda Open Space Management Plan.
The Montecito Planning Commission will receive and file the annual status report as required by condition number 14 of the approved Casa Dorinda Master Plan Conditional Use Permit Project Case Number 14 RVP 5.
Are we, Commissioner Keller?
Thanks. I'm just wondering if there's anyone who can answer any questions about this report.
Mr. Chair, this is John Zorovich, the manager for the Energy, Minerals, and Compliance Division. As this is a consent item, there's not a formal presentation, but today we do have some staff here available to answer any questions if there are questions of your commission. Mr. Eric Graham, the permit compliance planner, is here, as well as Aaron Briggs, supervisor in the Energy Division. So we do have staff here if you have questions based on the.
I would like to ask a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Wanted to confirm if the bridge that was scheduled to be installed in September had actually been installed. The new pedestrian bridge that was destroyed, has that been installed?
Mr. Chair, just to clarify the process, so if Commissioner Keller has questions, so that essentially what we're doing is pulling the item from the consent agenda onto the standard agenda.
Well, that's fine. The question should be answered.
And that's fine. I just wanted to make that clear on the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, the date scheduled for the bridge installation at this point is December 6th.
I see. Was there any reason for the delay?
I don't know what the delay is. We're working with Montecito Trails to get that installed, so unclear why, but when I spoke to them yesterday, the date that they have for installation is Monday, December 6th.
Okay, good to know that. And I just want to make one comment, if I may, because I was on the Planning Commission in May of 2016 when we gave great deliberation to this open space plan, and were very, very strongly opposed to the use of any herbicides. And I see that according to this report that they actually did stop use of the herbicides in September of 2018. So I'm sorry to see that, given that all the recent awareness of cancer and other disease caused by the use of herbicides, that it took them over 2 years to stop that use. But fortunately now, and I guess for the last 3 years, there has not been any herbicide use in that open space. But just wanted to point out that that was a very strong concern and voiced concern of the commission at the time.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that for the staff that's here, Mr. Zotovich, to comment that, as this report is being filed, that it is the county's opinion that they are in compliance with the mandates of the memorandum.
Mr. Chair, that's right. They're in compliance with conditions of approval. They're in compliance with the management plan, and they're on track to meet all the goals for the 5 years of biological monitoring.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Secretary Wilson. I'd ask staff to clarify, just for the record, it's my understanding that since we've been doing these annual reports, they haven't been using any of those prohibited pesticides or herbicides. So if Mr. Graham could just clarify for the record, it's my understanding that it didn't take 3 years to stop using them, that from the beginning they didn't use them. That was a much deliberate discussion we had from the get-go that they weren't going to be using them.
Right. I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson, but it does state in the report that they stopped in September of 2018. And that's what I was going by. They may have stopped earlier, but the report states that they stopped in 2018 after it was approved and discussed in May of 2016. So there was a bit of a lag time, apparently.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, you are correct. They were using glyphosate prior to September 2018, and they stopped at that time.
Thank you.
Commissioner, I see. I think Susan, your hand is still raised. So Commissioner Police.
Jeff, Mr. Wilson, I'm just, are you thinking that report is is correct that it did take us 2 years to get that straightened out, or that's, what's your answer to the delay?
Commissioner Police, through the chair, I'm actually deferring to staff on that question. My understanding was I remember those conversations at the hearings, and we amended the open space management plan to specifically prohibit the use of those items. And so there's my understanding is we were briefing the commission that the Casa Drena had not been using those items.
Okay. Well,
Somebody's right.
It was, excuse me, but it was just confirmed that they were using them for 2 years until September of 2018, at which point they stopped. And that's all I wanted to clarify, possibly that's the point at which we prohibited them, or we asked it to be prohibited, but it had been a major concern of the commission from the very beginning. And it was I think I just wanted to point out that we were anticipating the kinds of problems that now have scientifically been shown to exist. So,
I would just say, and possibly, I don't want to be defending the use of it, but they could have decided on their own that they were going to taper it down 80% and only do the areas close to the certain plants, because there's 2 or 3 plants that you have to use it if you're going to get rid of them. Otherwise, you're going to have them all the time. So maybe they did a conditional, only do a little bit and then completely took it off the board after 2 years. It's not, I'm not trying to justify their behavior, but there may be some more details that we're missing.
the details, as we understood them, that it was more expensive to do the weed removal by hand rather than using the glyphosate. And that was the initial justification. And I don't know if your conjecture is correct. And we don't need to discuss this any further, except that I just wanted to give the commission a little pat on the back for having seen this as a problem, having really pursued it aggressively, and finally getting compliance from Casa Tremenda. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a funny feeling that if language like this had shown up in some of the other compliance reports, there would have been a reaction to it. And I don't know what the subsequent compliance submissions looked like, but clearly we're many years into this, and this is kind of showing up as a piece of history now. My only curiosity is if there's a mandate from the Planning Commission to perform in a certain way, and that doesn't happen for multiple years, that as an issue would show up in a filing and with some language about why. If I think Ron's comment is correct, but if there was some reason to augment the stipulations of the Planning Commission, I would think that would be made clear. Commissioner Keller.
Well, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I thought I made it clear that we raised it as an issue, that we were concerned about it, that I think the initial recommendation was to avoid it, and that we did not actually feel we had the mandate to prohibit it, which we did possibly at a later date. So okay. I'm just saying that all I'm noting is that the issue was definitely raised in the first set of discussions. It was a concern of the existing MPC, and finally, the recommendation, the desire of the MPC was carried out fully. So I think it's understandable that it might have taken a little longer, but it was a red flag that we had raised from the very beginning. So that's all I wanted to say.
I'll entertain a motion to accept the report and file it. Commissioner Senauer?
I so move.
I second.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Police,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Senauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Chair Kupiak.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Thank you. I think we should move on to what's now going to be item number 2, right? The Meadows lot split. This is a continual.
Mr. Chair, can we?
I'll read this into. Yeah.
I'll read it into the record, but staff just needs a minute to prepare.
Sure.
So the following is the hearing on the request of Greg Crawford, property owner and applicant, to consider case number 19 TPM 6 and to determine the project is exempt from the provisions of CEQA pursuant to State CEQA Guideline Section 15315.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name is Alex Tuttle. I'll be providing you with some information today on the Meadows lot split project. As you recall, your commission heard this project a couple months ago, and staff had provided a presentation of the project, and your commission continued the item in order to allow an opportunity for the applicant to work with staff to draft an offer to dedicate regarding the public use of trails through the subject property. So in the intervening months, staff and the applicant worked together to draft that document. It was presented to you in the form of an attachment to a memorandum that you had received last week. Staff is comfortable with the way the document reads, which provides for 2 triggers in the event that the offer to dedicate would come into play. One would be if the property were sold, and the second would be if the applicants or the property owners were to attempt to revoke the existing consent to use of land for the public trail. So the offer to dedicate is irrevocable for a period of 90 years, which was the maximum determined to be legally feasible. And it would be recorded concurrently or prior to recordation of the tentative parcel map upon approval. With that said, staff updated the project description to include, in working with the applicant, to include reference to the offer to dedicate, and that was included as attachment B to your staff memorandum, along with the findings that were originally provided as attachment A to the staff report dated August 19th, 2021. And so staff continues to recommend approval of the project, and includes the recommendations that you make the findings for approval as specified in attachment A of the staff report dated August 19th, 2021, including CEQA findings, that you determine the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA Guidelines Section 15315, included as attachment C of the staff memorandum dated November 9th, and approve the parcel map 19 TPM 6 subject to the conditions included as attachment B of the staff memorandum dated November 9th, 2021. That's it for staff's presentation, and we are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you. I have a question about the 2 conditions that the OTD is now formalized. We discussed this in general at our last, basically prompting the continuance to have something formalized if possible. My question is the number 1 condition, if the property is sold. It is if the property is sold outside the family, is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer, that is correct. Yeah. So if
I think the language, yeah, I think
within the family, that would
yeah, and the language I believe is in the formalized OTD. Is that correct? But not in this particular conditions of approval, the paragraph that starts portions of the trail, etc. So it might be helpful to include that descriptive throughout.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, you're correct that those two triggers are not in the project description. I'm sure it would be, there'd be no objection on the part of the applicant or staff to include those triggers explicitly in the project description as well, if that's your direction.
Thank you. And the other question is, does the trail basically go through each of the proposed lot splits, the 1, 2, the 3? Does it, I'm trying to see the parameters. Does it go through everyone? Does it go through each of them, some of them?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, give me 1 minute and I'll pull up the
Thank you.
PowerPoint presentation
Thank you.
from the last hearing, which includes
Thank you. Thank you.
The graphic.
And then I have one more question after that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, I don't know if you can see it from your vantage point, but I do have a slide depicting the 3 lots, parcel 1, which contains the existing development, parcel 2, and parcel 3. And the trail actually follows primarily within Lot 2, sort of along the edge of the property, and then winds its way at the top of Lot 3. It does not look like Lot 1 includes any segments of the trail.
So, thank you. So if upon sale outside of the family, the lots could be sold separately, obviously. So the trail is sort of broken up, so to speak. Is that correct? I'm trying to determine if the trail is a whole, whether or not it involves particular parcels.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, it's set up and the applicant's representative is online as well to be able to answer any of these questions. But the way it's set up, my understanding is that if any of the parcels are sold, the offer to dedicate would kick in. And that would add it to the entire property boundaries, which would be all segments of the trail within the 3 lots.
Thank you for that. I think that also would be helpful to include in language. Because right now it's just if the property was sold, I think if there could be a specification to what you just referenced, that, and perhaps the applicant can address that too. But I think that would be helpful. My last question, and maybe it's best to wait for the applicant, but I will ask this question. Just if in fact one of the parcels or the property is, quote, sold, disclosure follows, is that correct, with a buyer, that in fact this follows the land, so to speak? Is that correct? Would this be a disclosure? And I'm trying to figure out where the OTD, the county, vis-a-vis a new outside of the family buyer, how this gets reconciled.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, perhaps I'll make one statement and then defer to the applicant's representative or county council if they want.
Or council, right, thank you.
But yeah, this OTD is recorded against the property, so it would come up in a title report or as a disclosure document, if any, during any sale proceedings. And that
Okay,
would that would
okay.
apply to all three parcels.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. I think the comments by Commissioner Sena are very well taken because the memorandum refers to the quote property, but it's actually 3 separate parcels. So I think it's important to note that when it talks about a sale, and it should be included to anyone outside the family. And I think it's also important to say the sale of any one of the parcels because it's a little unclear as to which is indicated by the property. But thank you, Commissioner Sena. My actual questions were, can you please explain, because I was curious why the 90 years, I mean, usually a lease is 99 years, so the number 90 seemed a strange cutoff period. And I'm wondering why that was proscribed and if at the end of 90 years there's any automatic continuance or if that would there would need to be another entire easement granted. Can you explain that, if you please, either Mr. Tuttle or Mr. Pettit?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, I will defer to Mr. Pettit on that one.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, the 90 years was chosen because there are legal limitations on the continued existence of unvested property interests. There's a provision in California law that allows an unvested real property interest to exist for up to 90 years. So that's the sort of the fail-safe time period, and that was identified as the longest period that the offer could live for. And so the applicant agreed to extend the life of the offer to the maximum life that it could have under the law. And so at the end of that 90-year period, if the interest has not vested, then it would automatically terminate per its terms.
And how would that interest be vested such that the easement could be continued?
It would vest upon the county's acceptance of the offer. So if either of the triggers is activated, it would vest upon the county's acceptance of that.
Oh, I see. So that this 90-year period is only of the consent period. It's not if it actually vests in terms of an easement.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, I would explain it this way. The offer is effective immediately. The county's power to accept that offer is only activated upon the existence of one of those two conditions. So the offer goes into existence upon its recordation, and it's good for 90 years. The county can only accept it if one of those two conditions comes about. And so the offer would live for up to 90 years.
Okay.
So if it isn't accepted within that 90-year period, it would terminate at the end of that. And that 90-year period is the maximum extent allowed under California law for unvested property interests.
Thank you for explaining that. I was concerned that the easement would only be in effect for 90 years. You've made that very clear. Thank you. And I also wanted to see if there's any particular, it talks about family members as being family members of Catherine Crawford or Ashley Binsezki. Pardon my pronunciation. But is there a definition of family members? Is this by marriage? Is there any limitation on the relationship of those people such that they might be considered family members for purposes of it not being sold? I'm not sure who could answer that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, I think I would again defer to the the applicant's representative who helped, was the primary author of the OTD, and perhaps she could, Ms. Collins could speak to that.
I can speak to it. Hi, Chair and Commissioner Keller. So you're right. There's not a definition. Your lawyer training is coming out, Commissioner Keller. There isn't a definition of family members, and as you know, then you revert to definition in a dictionary. So family, being related. Would be the broad definition. So, we could look into a further definition, but I think most people think of family as either related by blood or marriage.
I'm not particularly troubled by that, but it just seems that it does give them a lot of leeway, because it also would include some sort of adoption, which might be done for convenience. And so but I don't know how else how more specifically family member could be defined, or if they would attempt to do so, to take an end run around family members. So thank you for acknowledging that is a little vague, but it may not be an issue. And the other thing I wanted to just be certain of, I am not remembering if it was brought up at the last meeting, what the existing consent to use, how is that in any way in writing? Was it just a verbal offer that was made that you can use these trails that cross over our land? I'm just wondering in what form that is currently.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, the existing consent is a written document. I don't recall the exact year, but it was sometime recorded in the early 1970s. I believe. And
that's right.
Part of this agreement is that they will update that consent to use of land, because currently it's only written to include hiking and equestrian use, and to be consistent with other trails within the county. They would be updating that consent to use of land to incorporate non-motorized bicycles as well.
Very good. And I think I was glad it was not just bicycles, but also any kind of vehicle, because that's motorized. So that will be consistent throughout, yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, appreciate that.
Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you. Who is responsible for maintenance of the trail at this time and until these two conditions get kicked in? One of the two, either of the two.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer, Montecito Trails Foundation currently maintains the trail.
Are they present? Are they here today?
They don't appear to be on the list
Okay.
of attendees.
All right. Thank you. So it's so upon acceptance, if it does happen, of an OTD, the county would be responsible. Is that correct? Parks?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer, the county parks would be the owners of the trail through the easement. The way the easement is drafted, or the OTD is drafted, as with most other trails in the Montecito area, it would be expected that Montecito Trails Foundation would continue to play a role in trail maintenance.
Thank you.
Is there any commentary from the owner at this time?
This is Ginger Anderson with Stantec. Chair Kubiak and commissioners, thank you for working with us on this, and staff for all of your time, and county council's collaboration on the offer to dedicate. We have reviewed the conditions and the new material provided by Alex in the last couple of days, and are accepting of the conditions. I concur with the answers that Alex had given The current notice of consent was recorded in 1973. And yes, Montecito Trails does a lot on that trail. The owner, Mr. Crawford for Miradero LLC, is on the line. If you have any questions for him, but I just wanted to let you all know that we're grateful for the work that's been going on with the OTD, and we're here for questions if you have any. Greg, did you want to say anything?
I would just echo what Ginger said. We really appreciate all the time and energy and effort that the council and staff has put into this situation, and we are very much looking forward to continue working together the way we have for almost 50 years now. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I could just interject here. Ms. Anderson, there seems your audio kept going in and out while you were speaking. So if I'm not sure if there's any adjustment you can make to your headset, if you have any additional comments.
No, can you hear me now? I was basically just saying thank you, and we've looked at the conditions and we're appreciative of staff's time, and we didn't have any questions.
Great, well, thank you. And I think based upon some of the comments that were made, we would entertain a motion from the floor, the commission. Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to see if staff could work on the language that I addressed, including in the project description. If that could be part of the motion. And so I'm just asking for clarification if that needs to be added to what is before us as far as the staff recommendation to the commission's motion. So if someone can help me out here, thank you.
Mr.
Chair, Commissioner Senauer, I'm not sure if that was a question directed to staff, but if your question was whether the project description can be updated, or request was to update the project description to include specific reference to the triggers, the two triggers, and the definition, clarify what is meant by property, then we can certainly accomplish that.
Yes, those are my two components to be added. Thank you.
And I think it's clear enough to where we could just go ahead and follow your direction on that, and then you would see it in the minutes at your next hearing.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I think council has their hand up, and then my recommendation is either trail this item and make the changes so that the commission knows what they're voting on, and then all commissioners can agree to it, or take a quick break and have staff make those changes, and then bring it back to the commission to look at. And Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to defer to council on any other.
Yeah, I would too. Brian, Mr. Pettit.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just echoing what Mr. Wilson said, I would recommend that if it's the commission's desire to make changes directly to the project description, I would recommend that you trail the item and actually have those changes before you approve it. However, looking at the language of the project description, if the commission's desire is just to have the OTD updated to reflect those two items, I think the project description is written broadly enough that you could approve the existing project description with the clarification that the OTD will be in a form substantially similar to what's in the project description, with direction to staff just to address those two items. So I think you have two options, but if it's the commission's desire to make textual changes to the project description, I would recommend going with Mr. Wilson's recommendation and trail the item to actually see those changes before approving the project.
Brian, I guess I don't understand part two. How does that happen if we approve the language that's here?
So, Mr. Chair, the oftentimes, so it was the applicant's desire to actually bring an OTD in a close to final form for your commission's review. It's not unusual to have a project approved with a condition to subsequently draft and finalize that OTD, and to have that be finalized prior to final permit approval. So you could approve the project description as drafted and have those minor changes to the OTD occur subsequent to project approval. So it would either be make changes directly to the project description or to just approve the project description. And I understand those two items that you're looking for, and they can be finalized prior to recordation of the OTD.
May I just say something, please, or ask a question? Our motion should include making the required findings for the approval of the project specified in Attachment A. And Attachment A is the OTD, which does spell out specifically the terms of the offer, including the definition of sale and the definition of the terms of the in terms of it defines the triggers, and it is very specific. So it's possible that we don't need to make any change.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, just to clarify, the Attachment A is in reference to Attachment A of the initial staff report, which are the findings, as opposed to Attachment A of the staff memorandum, which is the OTD. But as you noted, or kind of similarly, the OTD is included by reference in the project description, and it is included as a attachment to the memorandum. So. And in that OTD, the definition of property is referenced. So I think we have it all covered. I guess, as Mr. Pettit indicated, you have two options of how to move forward with it.
Hey, Commissioner Miller.
I think that Commissioner Sanauer has made a good point, and I appreciate what she's raised. That said, I would be prepared to move forward on a motion and rather than have this go back to staff for redrafting. It would be my preference to see this happen today.
I see Ms. Anderson's hand raised. Or not?
Yeah, Chair Kubiak, thank you so much. I was going to share sentiments similar to what Commissioner Miller just said. It sounded like in the beginning of this hearing that December was going to be a very light agenda and that the next hearing would be till January. So whatever the commission's desire is, I would suggest that if there are going to be certain changes that if it's the commission's desire, that maybe we can put kind of Alex and myself on the spot to make those changes and pick it back up at the end of this same hearing rather than a future hearing, if that was the desire, just to, again, get it done today.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Police.
Yes, we've done this before, so why don't they just go ahead and modify what they need to modify, and we can vote on it before we go home today, or before we end the meeting.
Well, that's kind of well, let's go to Commissioner Sanauer.
Well, the question is, do we need to modify the language? Okay. And if we do, I think staff could do it promptly. And we can either trail it or take a 5 or 10 minute break. I have, and it doesn't seem that the indicators for the commission is to offer any language, additional language for clarification, unlike mine. I do have a question about the definition of, quote, property. can you please reference where the property is so the descriptive is in fact one of 3 parcels, 2 of 3 parcels, etc. The parcel delineation of the property, is that by reference? I see Mr. Pettit nodding his head. So property, should we approve? Should we approve the this project? Property then involves 1, 2, and 3. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Stenhour, that is correct. If you refer to the offer to dedicate, it defines the property and includes references to exhibits A and B, which would be legal description for the property, which would be inclusive of all 3 lots. Those attachments or those exhibits haven't yet been completed, but those would be packaged with the OTD when it gets recorded. So the property is inclusive of all 3.
Okay, and if it does, but if one of those parcels is sold versus all of them in toto, how does that get clarified or understood?
Wasn't it clear that if one of the parcels is sold, that it triggers the OTD?
Is it?
Yes, that was already discussed.
And where is it in the
Mr. Chair,
language?
Commissioner Stenhour, that's certainly the intent behind how it was drafted. I think what you're hearing today from the applicant, from county staff, is that we're happy to take another look at the language of the OTD, and if we believe that further refinement or clarification is required per that sentiment, then those edits could be done before the OTD gets recorded.
After we vote on the project?
That is certainly a possibility, yes.
Okay.
And I think
So as long as it is understood the language of which I am speaking to be added, we can go ahead, and that as long as we all understand and accept that language, we can move on now. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, if we go back to Mr. Pettit, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Chair. Mr. Pettit's earlier discussion, there's 2 items, 2 options. Option one is, as Commissioner Stenhour is asking for changes to the project description in concurrence with the applicant. We can do that today. Recommendation is, if you want to make changes to the project description, take a break, trail it to the end of the hearing, have staff make those changes and bring it back. That's option 1. Option 2 is accept it as is written at the moment, with the understanding that everything's already captured either in the OTD or the project description the way it's worded, and that the concerns that Commissioner Stenhour is already being addressed. So my recommendation is that the commission decides on which option they want to take. And then depending on what that option is, we can recalibrate and support the commission with that.
So here's my question to Mr. Pettit. Is it possible, if we continue on to the next item on the agenda and we do our trail this to the end, that language can be updated for us to review before the hearing is over? Is there time enough to do that?
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioners, trying to keep this as clear as possible. I would have to defer to staff on their ability to make changes to the project description. I believe that Mr. Wilson has indicated that it would not be difficult to make the changes requested by Commissioner Stenhour. The changes to the text of the OTD itself, if you want to see the final version of how family is defined, it might take some additional time with discussions with counsel for the applicant. So if it's the commission's desire to approve it today, regardless of making changes to the project description, I would still recommend, unless the commission wants to see the very final version of the OTD, or the applicant wants the very final version of the OTD, that it be approved with the OTD in a substantially similar form to what's attached. So
I understand.
Again, staff can address the changes to the project description. I would still recommend that the approval be in a substantial form so that we can iron out the final language to the OTD itself.
Ms. Collins.
I think it would be helpful through the chair and commissioners. I just want to be very clear on the portions of the text that the commission would like updated. It was my understanding that we were okay with family. We can certainly.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And so what I heard is concern that even though the OTD defines property as the entire property, all three parcels, there was maybe concern that if there was a sale of any one parcel of the property, it wouldn't trigger the OTD. We can easily say sale of a portion of the
Yes.
property. So that's very simple, and there's the edit. Sale of a portion of the property,
Yes.
and that would be sufficient to trigger the county being able to accept the OTD. So were there any other edits that people wanted to the language of the OTD?
Commissioner Keller.
I beg your pardon. There's no change in the language of the OTD, but what I was not clear on was that we are making the required findings for the approval of the project specified in attachment A of the staff report. And I just wanted to make sure that if we approved the staff report from August of 2021, that incorporated the OTD and the language of the OTD, so that it was clear that the two triggers were the ones that are specified in the OTD. This property is sold or permission is revoked by the grantor. And so, and I was also, I'm pleased that you are simply making a simple change to the definition of the property or portion of the property, because that was my concern. But I think Commissioner Senauer raised the issue that it wasn't specified in the staff report that there were two triggers to the OTD. But if there's a link to that, then that should be sufficient, if you're following my logic.
Chair and Commissioner, yes. So I'm following your logic. Our intent with the project description was to incorporate by reference the OTD.
Yes.
So that everybody understood that the OTD was part of the project,
Yes.
and that we all agreed on the text of the OTD. So I think as long as the project description refers to the OTD, we all understand that the OTD will be triggered and the county can accept if a portion of the property is sold. And that would just be an amendment on page 4, where it says offer unless and until a portion of the property is sold.
Yes.
Then I think we could be maybe done
Yes.
today.
I recommend, before we get into, chasing this any further, I'm going to recommend that with that language included in the OTD, that a portion of the property will trigger the OTD, that it's possible for us to make this approval today with that language incorporated into the document. I'd like to just poll the commission to see if what I'm suggesting is satisfactory to everybody. Commissioner Senauer?
Yes, satisfactory.
I'm just looking for other hand. Commissioner Keller?
Yes, I think Ms. Collins has proposed a perfect solution.
And I would recommend that we make a motion.
I agree.
Mr. Police, I'm going to put you on the spot to make a motion.
Okay, well,
Chair, sorry, Mr. Chair, while Mr. Police is getting ready to make that motion, can we just call for public comment real quick? Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. You caught us. We'll open this to public comment. David, is there anyone here who would wish to speak on this matter?
Mr. Chair, we didn't have anyone who signed up to speak on the item, but I believe I got an email just a few minutes ago indicating that Ms. Mayfield of the Montecito Trails Foundation is on the line to be present. I'm happy to unmute her to see if she has any comments on it, or if you have any questions.
Let's do that.
All right, Ms. Mayfield, if you hit *6 on your phone, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. Hello, Commissioner.
I don't have any comment.
Thank you. And that said,
But I was here because I heard there was a question for me, but I didn't have comments.
I'm going to close public comment and ask for that motion.
Yes, I move that we approve the project as stated in the staff report, and it's referenced to the OTD, assuming we're going to have modifications before the close of the day. Is that correct?
That is not correct.
No, the OTD is not going to be changed. But why don't you repeat what you said?
The OTD will be amended to include the language that says if a portion of the property is sold, it will trigger the OTD.
Mr.
All right,
Chair,
so-
Commissioner Pulice, if I could direct your attention to the staff recommended action on the first page of the staff memorandum. It lays out what your recommended action, what your motion could include.
Well, I'm good with that. Sure, you are. So I actually moved rooms because I was getting poor reception, so I no longer have my agenda and my book in front of me, so I'm kind of limited here. But anyway, can I get some help, Susan?
I'll be happy to move that we accept the that we approve the staff recommendations, which include making the required findings for approval of the project specified in attachment A of the staff report dated August 19th, 2021, including the CEQA findings, that we determine the project is exempt from CEQA, and that we approve the tentative parcel map. And at some point, I think in the first portion, the approval of the project specified in attachment A, and including by reference the offer to dedicate with the amendment in the definition of the property sale.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
There you go. So you can second it.
I'll second. Thank you, Susan.
So can we have a roll call vote?
Commissioner Pulice,
Yes.
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Senauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Chair Kupiak.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Collins, for helping us to zero in on that language.
Sorry I wasn't more helpful, Chair.
Thank you.
It's okay. We're, the right outcome has taken place. So we're very content. We shall move on to the next item on our agenda, which is our Edgecliff Lane Gatehouse. Can you read this item into the agenda, David?
Okay, while staff is opening their presentation, I'll read this. Following is a hearing on the request of Randall Van Vossinkel, owner, to consider case numbers 21 CDH 8 and 21 VAR 1, and to determine the project is exempt from the provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to state CEQA guidelines sections 15303 and 15305.
And I guess we are ready for the applicant's presentation.
Should we have
Actually,
ex parte?
I was just going to say, are there any ex parte admissions by the commission? Do we have any reports, Commissioner Senauer?
Yes, I walk by the property or the project property on Eucalyptus quite often and take the easement trail, the county easement trail, many, many times. So I have, so I made a purposeful visit 2 days ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Keller.
I only wish to report that I also am very familiar with the area and made a visit down there, just drove by to double check the location of the proposed gatehouse.
It's also, I would admit that it's hard not to be familiar with this site, going to the beach, down through that, passing that little building all the time. Thank you. If the applicant's ready.
Mr. Chair, that would be staff presentation first.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Willow Brown. I will be presenting the proposal for the Edgecliff Lane Gatehouse. This is an aerial view of Edgecliff Lane. The project is located at the beginning of Edgecliff Lane, adjacent to the existing entry gate. The project is a request for a coastal development permit to allow for the construction of a new 100-square-foot gatehouse along Edgecliff Lane, a shared private road to serve all properties in the neighborhood. The gatehouse will have a maximum height of 10 feet 5 inches. Minor landscaping will be added around the area of work. The project also includes a variance that will allow for the proposed gatehouse to be located in the front setback of the property. The gatehouse will be located 3 feet 9 inches from the northwest property line and 2 feet 6 inches from the private road easement along Edgecliff Lane. No grading is proposed and no trees are proposed for removal. Here are photos of the project site. The photos on the left and in the center show Edgecliff Lane with the existing gate and columns. The photo on the right shows the existing public access to the beach. This is a site plan of the subject property showing the proposed location of the gatehouse in the front setback. The gatehouse is unable to be located outside the setbacks for the lot as the private road and existing gate are within the front setback of the lot. This is a floor plan of the proposed gatehouse. The project is consistent with the purpose and intent of a variance because there are conditions on the property that would cause the literal enforcement of Article 2 to impose practical difficulties on the property. The proposed gatehouse structure must be located adjacent to the existing roadway and gate in order to function for its intended purpose, which necessitates construction of the gatehouse within the front setback area. By enforcing the required setbacks of the 1E1 zone district, a gatehouse could not be located along Edgecliff Lane. Any proposed gatehouse that is intended to serve an adjacent road would need to be located within the setback. Therefore, the proposed variance does not grant special privileges to the subject parcel because all parcels are subject to the same requirement to obtain a variance for any proposed gatehouse use. Additionally, the property is constrained by an 18 to 20 foot high coastal bluff and required bluff top setback, which limits the developable area of the parcel. The subject property is further constrained by the fact that a private roadway, Edgecliff Lane, bifurcates the parcel, creating a 20-foot setback from the Edgecliff Lane right-of-way and 51-foot setback from the property line. Staff thinks a variance can be granted because of constraints the property is subject to and the need for the gatehouse to be located adjacent to the entry gate. The project is consistent with all applicable Article 2 zoning requirements. It is consistent with the purpose and intent of the 1E1 zone and will be consistent with the required setbacks of the zone with approval of the variance. The project is also consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the Coastal Land Use Plan and Montecito Community Plan. There are adequate services available to serve the proposed gatehouse. Additionally, the gatehouse is in conformance with the scale and character of the existing community. The gatehouse is compatible with the existing gate structure. The gatehouse will be made of sandstone to match the gate columns. The project was reviewed by the MBAR, and the MBAR stated that the architecture is well designed and appropriately sized and has character that reflects the nature of the community. The project is exempt from environmental review pursuant to Sections 15303 and 15305 of CEQA. Section 15303 exempts the construction and location of limited numbers of new, small facilities or structures. Section 15305 exempts minor alterations in land use limitations, including setback variances that do not result in the creation of a new parcel. Given that the project is for the construction of a new 100-square-foot gatehouse and a variance to allow for the gatehouse to be located in the front setback on property with slopes less than 20% and does not result in a change in land use or density, Sections 15303 and 15305 of the CEQA guidelines apply to the proposed project. Staff recommends that your commission make the required findings for approval of the project, determine the project is exempt from CEQA, and grant approval of the project subject to the conditions of approval. Thank you. I'm available for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Police?
Yes, I have a question. Is the association of the homeowners going to be in charge of the management of the gate?
Commissioner Police, through the chair, yes, the homeowners will be responsible for managing the gatehouse and the staff in the gatehouse.
And will they have hours of operation as far as manning that gatehouse?
Commissioner Police, through the chair, it's proposed that it will be managed 24 hours.
Really? Okay. But managed, but would that be by gate control, or will there be actually a man there for more than one shift a day or a person?
Commissioner Police, through the chair, it's my understanding that there will be someone in the gatehouse 24 hours a day.
Oh, okay. That's a bit of overkill, but I guess if that's what they want, that's great.
Great. Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. I'm just curious, in the MBAR report, it describes this as a 775 square foot gatehouse. And now it's a third bigger at 100 square feet. Why was that change made? And or was that a mistake to say it was 75 square feet when it went before MBAR?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, the original proposal at MBAR was 75 square feet, and MBAR staff requested that it be enlarged to meet building requirements.
Okay, yeah, because that isn't listed anywhere. And in terms of grading, I couldn't tell from the drive-by, but in some of the photos, it looks like there's going to be a fair amount of cutting into, and it may just be landscaping, existing landscaping, or it looks like they will have to cut into something on the north side of where it's proposed to be. Is that just from the photos? Is that just landscaping, or is it actual dirt that will require some cut?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, there's no grading proposed. It would be widening the area that's landscaping currently.
Right, because you say there's no grading. That's why I was curious, because especially in the photo on page, well, the photo that shows G100 on the plans, it shows the location of the gatehouse, which looks as though there's a stone wall as well as some landscaping that will need to be demolished. Is that the case?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, I'll let the applicant further talk about the plan to widen the road, but as far as I'm aware, there's no grading proposed, and that's just landscaping, and there's also a hedge.
Okay. Maybe that someone could answer that question, because it looks like there would be some grading involved. And possibly, my second question is in conjunction with that, would there be any impact during construction to the easement that goes around on the north side of the Edgecliff properties? The public easement path.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, I have some photos of the easement, if we could pull it up on the screen. So the road widening will all be done within the property lines. The 10-foot public trail easement is located adjacent to the property, outside of the property lines. No work will be permitted within the 10-foot public trail easement, and all construction-related vehicles will be required to be on-site and outside of the road and highway right-of-way. This slide shows the Ocean Meadows development plan, which included the 10-foot public trail easement. The easement is adjacent to the properties along Bonnie Mead Lane and the properties along Edgecliff Lane.
Right. Curious. Go back, please, to that last photo. So it appears that they're going to be widening the entire Edgecliff Lane road. I don't know what it's actually called. Is that correct? So they will be widening all of Edgecliff Lane based on the photo you just showed with showing the yellow widening?
That was the highlighted yellow is the public trail easement. This is a site plan showing the portion of the road to be widened. This was conceptually approved by the fire department, and all the widening will be on the property at 1491 Edgecliff Lane. This aerial photo shows the property line outlined in dark brown and the easement shaded in red.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
I also have some
Thank you.
photos showing the entrance to the trail and the entrance to Edgecliff Lane on the right, and then the existing trail on the left and in the center.
Good. Thank you. It's better to visualize. And I have just one other question. Unfortunately, I mean, they did give some samples of other gatehouses, and that was helpful to see. And I certainly have no issue with them wanting to put in a gatehouse. But as I look at these corresponding gatehouses to places like San Ysidro Ranch, Burnham Wood, Montecito Country Club, private residences, etc., they are all quite charming with a lot of architectural detail and some variety in the roof line and fixtures on the outside. And I'm afraid I find the plans for this particular gatehouse make it look like a bunker. And I think that's, yes, it is consistent with the stone wall, but it makes it look like a stone bunker. And since it is so very much in the public eye and adjacent to a public easement, I'm wondering why the MBAR didn't see fit to suggest they incorporate a little more architectural detail that would make it more charming and consistent with other gatehouses in the community, such as they have given us photos of. Was there any discussion about that? Or is there any chance that they would reconsider the bunker-like appearance of this gatehouse?
Chair Kupiec and Commissioner Keller, this is Nicole Liu, assisting Willow on this project. And so the BAR minutes state that the MBAR appreciates the design and that they find it to be nice architecture appropriate to the design and scale. They did also add a comment that says consider adding an overhang above the east-facing door, which would add some additional articulation to the design and could be addressed by the applicant at the final approval stage potentially. So.
Thank you, Ms. Liu. It's that kind of detail that I think this particular design is lacking, especially when you stack it up against the other examples they've given. So I don't know if this recommendation or this, what I'm expressing, can in any way be carried forward to the MBAR or just be noted by the applicant, but I would appreciate that. I think it would greatly enhance the appearance of the gatehouse. Thank you.
Commissioner Senauer.
Thank you. Is the applicant going to give a presentation?
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair, the applicant will be giving a brief presentation and will be available for questions.
Okay, I think I'll just hold off till then. Thank you.
Commissioner Police.
Yes, I guess I can hold off as well, just while hear what they have to say first. Thank you.
Then let's move on to the applicant's presentation.
Hi all, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, good morning. This is Zach Hansen with the Warner Group. I just wanted to make some quick comments here. Thank you, Willow, for the presentation. So in the very beginning of this project, we reached out to pretty much every neighbor on Edgecliff Lane, and every resident very much wants this gatehouse. They all gave sentiments that there had been increased vandalism and theft and noise violations, and this gatehouse would definitely help with all that. Just being so close to the beach, as well as this public access trail, which goes essentially adjacent to the entire street, that's probably the key factor in all of these problems. So a guard, which was mentioned, is proposed to be there 24/7, would definitely help with all that. Another thing, a few of the neighbors should have provided some written public comment today, and I believe there is also a woman who's going to speak later on our behalf. In terms of the question that was proposed by one of the commissioners. The building will need to be cut into the slope. And essentially, the fire department required us to widen the road only in our property to 20 feet. And so that happened after the last MBAR hearing. So that's probably why the grading of that wasn't put on there. But yes, we'll have some minor site walls that will need to be cut into that small hill. And as Will said, the public access trail won't be impeded. The public easement on our property, sorry, the road easement going through Edgecliff will not be impacted. And I think that's about it. In terms of the design, as Willow stated, the MBAR was very much liking what we were showing. And they did advise us to add a small awning on the east side, which will, again, help to kind of further detail it. It is in a conceptual phase, so we typically add more detail as we go along. So we're going to add, light fixtures on the outside, more details, at the corners and eave. That should all be addressed at the next hearing. Thanks.
Commissioner Palice.
Yes, thank you for that. Maybe you can answer a couple of questions for me.
Sure.
From a kind of a construction perspective here, and from an operation perspective, it's really, I imagine the owners of the properties all have gates, openers to get into the thing, to get in anytime they want. But if they have guests that want to come in, and by some chance there isn't a guard there, is there any kind of operation? Usually it'd be on the driver's side next to that hedge, across from the windows of the bunker there, just so you're within a safe distance from the gate, but you can get in. Say like your friend of your family's wants to come in and you give them the gate code and they can get in because there's no guard. As it's set up here, it looks like you have to have someone in the clubhouse there or in the gatehouse in order to get in. And I just think, are you planning to have some kind of key operation on the left side?
Yes. I think there would be a manual key override, in lieu of the guard. And, I think each member of the, would be able to let someone in from the gate from their house too.
Yeah. And I just say, because I've, was a resident of the Innisbrook, and we voted not to have it there 24/7 because it was very expensive. Now, of course, it's a different clientele possibly, but it seems like from the hours of 10 at night to 6 in the morning is such very little traffic that using the keypad would make sense, but that's totally up to you, of course.
Yeah, I think it's a very specific, kind of per person thing. In terms of our client, he definitely wants it. I think the 24/7 thing would go well. Recently, last week, there was a break-in at one of the homes. A window was broken into, and I believe some items were stolen. So the guard being there at night, I think, would be able to patrol the area, make sure that public access trail, there's no one coming in from the beach. So I think it's more than just the gate,
I see.
It's kind of the whole neighborhood that would benefit.
That's understandable. Thank you.
Commissioner Senauer.
Thanks. So just to detail the 20-foot drive in the roadway, that is a condition of the fire department. It only goes to the gate. Is that correct? In front of 1491, is that the address?
Correct. So that was their only requirement, was that it had to be on our property. And essentially, there's two site walls to the left and right of the gate, which were within that 20 feet. So those two walls are being pushed back. And they were okay with the actual gatehouse not having 20 feet setback from the southern portion of the road.
Okay, so how close is it to the easement fence? How close will the guardhouse be on the north?
The north.
Uh-huh.
I believe it's about 3 feet.
It's very close.
3 to 4 feet. Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Is there access now via a key card?
Not a key card now. It's just a gate code.
Okay. And how long do you think the construction will take? Once all that gets squared away? Because there is other construction going on in those in those properties, 1 or 2 at least, or 3. So construction, all that, the traffic, the contractors it will be impacted. There'll be a lot more. So how long do you think the project will take to build?
I mean, it's a very small building. Typically with a job like this, we would get all the materials ordered, the windows, all that before we even started. So judging from that, I mean, I would say 4 to 5 months.
Okay. And the grading will be limited to that mound.
Very limited. Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. Yes, I see you do give a 3.9 setback from the northwest property line, which is the easement, I presume. So it's close, but thank you for your clarification about this being a preliminary drawing, because I think that you're correct. The addition of some architectural detail would make it much more attractive. And I hope that you will incorporate that. My concern is regarding construction parking, because that area is very, very limited already in parking for people who want to access the beach from that stairway at the end of Eucalyptus Lane. And so is that something that we can address in this approval? And specify that parking be located elsewhere, because to take up available beach parking for 4 or 5 months is just unacceptable. So I'm just wondering how we can deal with that. Mr. Wilson, do you have any input on that, please?
Commissioner Keller, if I could step in, there is a condition of approval under the attachment B1 for parking. It's the same condition that was applied for the CDH for the house on this property. It is condition 8, and it specifies that no construction parking is allowed on Eucalyptus Lane south of the railroad tracks, and it has to be on site.
Oh, thank you. I missed that. So so presumably, I'm just saying, so even north of the railroad track, there's not that much space. Is there any possibility that there might be off-site parking that they can be shuttled to and from? Or is there any location they can use that would get them off the street? Because even north of the railroad tracks, there's a lot of beach parking.
Commissioner Keller.
And we're talking, I'm sorry, just to say, because if it's a 4 or 5 month construction process that will not begin for a few months, this is taking us into next spring and summer already. So is there anything that can be done about that?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, the condition requires that it's all on site and outside of the road and highway right of way.
Yes, I see. It says that it's all on site.
So it's only people who live beyond the gate that are going to be inconvenienced. It's not public parking.
I'm sorry, both of you, I'm confused by both of you, please, because it said that equipment and storage areas shall be located on site. But there's no space for construction vehicles to be parked on site. So they'd have to be parked in the roadway. And even if it's north of the railroad tracks, that will still impact beach parking, because that's the only place for people for beach parking to park. So I'm asking if there's any possibility of a location that's further away than that.
Can I step in here?
Chair,
Yes, please.
So within the site, there actually is quite a bit of parking. There are 2 spots outside of the garage, and there's also 4 spots along the north property line to the west of the gatehouse. And there's actually also a second driveway that serves the guest house. So you could also probably fit 3 or 4 cars in there. So I think we'll be okay if we're limited to just site parking.
Oh, that's good. I'm sorry. It was hard to tell if there was that much parking on the Van Wolfswinkel property. So it's good to know that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just want to echo a little bit of Commissioner Keller's feeling. I mean, having sat on MBAR for a while, but I realize this is at the conceptual stage, and I think there's a couple of go for broke kind of design concepts here, like sandwiching the building between your walls. And I know that MBAR will look at details carefully, but I find the building a bit Spartan for that location. I mean, I find the architecture Spartan, not just the idea of putting a lamp on the building or facing it. I think that, articulating your 2 end walls in the way that they are articulated and holding your roof in between them, God's in the details. I think, I just want to echo out to my MBAR friends that I think this needs to be looked at pretty carefully. Knife edge details where the roof ends. What do gutters look like? How do you deal with water on this building? From my vantage point, I realize there's a mixed bag of architecture that's down at that end. But the truth of the matter is I find this building a little bit bare. And I think it really could use some architectural help. And I'm sure Warner Group will address that matter, but I just want to make sure that MBAR hears our voice a little bit more loud and clear. I think this project needs more embellishment than what I'm seeing in these preliminary SketchUp renderings.
I agree, Bob. I totally agree with you there.
Yeah, there's just nothing else in the area that actually echoes this type of architecture. I mean, I don't mean for you to have to embellish it completely up, but I just find this a little bit, I mean, it's a corporate gatehouse. It's not it just doesn't feel like it has the residential feel that the other buildings in this neighborhood have. So from my vantage point, I got to tell you, I'd be giving you a hard time at MBAR.
Bob, you can't say though, they are spending the money to put the stone facing all around it, that it just lacks detail from the roof, maybe awnings and those things. But I wonder, are we limited by virtue of how close we are to the trails to restrict the roof design? That may be a factor.
Yeah, I mean, I want to put this back in Zach's ball court because I think it's for you guys to chew on and think about.
Right.
But, the truth of the matter is, I think this needs more flavor. I mean, sad to say, you're hearing comments from me after I've just come back from a week in Rome. So I've been looking at Baroque details for quite a while. But, I think this architecture for its location and the fact that it's one of the spots in Montecito that we all pass all the time because we all go to the beach and walk through that way. So I want to see rich architecture, not, I think this is more minimalistic than I would be willing to approve if I were sitting at MBAR right now.
Thank you very much, Chair Kupiak. Bunker-like was my response, and I appreciate that
that was harsh.
that you are echoing that, but especially given the other gatehouses that have been shown, all of which have a great deal of character and detail. So thank you. We don't want to be harsh, but we do want to exert whatever influence we can to have you reconsider this design.
Yeah, I don't want Disneyland. I want Montecito. Commissioner Police.
I'm good. I pull my hand down. I'm fine. Thanks.
Commissioner Senauer.
Yeah, I thank you. I'd just like to pull this back. I think we're in deliberations. I don't know if there's been a
Well, we're kind of freewheeling here, Donna.
Yeah, I understand that, but we do have someone in public comment, I believe, that the architect said was waiting. David, if there is, I think that might be helpful before we continue with deliberations and hear from the individual. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Senauer is correct that we do have a couple of speakers. Whenever you feel the time is appropriate, I can call on them.
Let us open public comment right now.
All right, we do have two speakers. Our first speaker will be Gianna Colombo, to be followed by Maria Ferreira.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Hi, Gianna Colombo here, direct next door neighbor at 1483 Edgecliff Lane. I would really hope that you guys approve this gatehouse. We tossed around this idea as neighbors about 10 years ago and didn't get quite so much enthusiasm back then, but when Randall moved in, he loved the idea and was generous enough to offer to pay for it. So all the neighbors were on board, very excited, very enthusiastic. And, we actually really do need some security. Last weekend or Halloween weekend, our house was burglarized and ransacked. And it's a very, very bad feeling because we've lived there for quite many years and nothing like that has happened. So I just encourage you guys to approve the gatehouse. I think there's kids and there's elderly on the lane and we would all appreciate it. So please approve the gatehouse.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, looks like our second speaker left the meeting, so that would be our last speaker. Ms. Colombo was our last speaker.
Okay, then we will close public comment and move into any further comments that commissioners have about this project. Commissioner Keller. You're muted.
Sorry. I think we are all in agreement about approving the gatehouse. It's just a matter of the design, I think, has been the only concern. So I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the gatehouse. What needs to be incorporated into it includes here's the recommendations and procedure. I recommend that we approve the project specified in attachment A. We determine the project is exempt from CEQA and that we approve the project subject to the conditions of approval in the attachment B staff report.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Police.
Yes.
Commissioner Keller.
Yes.
Commissioner Senauer.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
Chair Kupiec.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Good luck, Zach.
Thank you, sir. I'm gonna need it, huh?
We'll see you again. Okay. Thank you all for your diligence through that. And now we move on to our last item, our update on the sea level rise.
Could we take a 5-minute break, please?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we take a break and convene at 11 o'clock sharp?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we're back on the air whenever you're ready to begin.
Let us resume our Planning Commission hearing meeting, and we are going to move on to the report for the updated sea level rise, which I guess is now agenda item number 4.
Mr. Chair, before Mr. Clemens starts his presentation, I just want to read the item into the record. The following is a hearing on the request of the Long Range Planning Division staff to present a report to the Montecito Planning Commission regarding the outcome of the county sea level rise local coastal program amendment. Case numbers 17 GPA 4 and 17 ORD 15.
Yes, good morning, Chair Kupiak, members of the commission. My name is Dan Clemens. I am the Deputy Director of the Long Range Planning Division, and I'll just be providing you the report today on our Sea Level Rise Local Coastal Program Amendment, or LCPA. So this story starts back in 2014 when we received authorization from the board and funding and from a few different sources to embark on this project, which consisted of generally 2 phases. The first consisted of developing a vulnerability assessment, which included modeling the various sea level rise scenarios and identifying facilities and existing development that would be subject to sea level rise hazards. And then second, developing policies and programs that get adopted as a part of our local coastal program to address the hazards that are identified in the vulnerability assessment. There was grant funding that supported this project. I bring this up because it was a Coastal Conservancy grant, which was administered by the Coastal Commission staff, which funded the vulnerability assessment, at least in part. And I bring that up to you because the story I'm going to tell you today is not one about bureaucrats in their silos and not talking to one another, but to point out that we have been engaged with the Coastal Commission staff with this project all along, going back to its very inception. So we processed the LCPA and presented it to the board, and the board ultimately adopted it in December 2018 and authorized us to go ahead and submit the local coastal program amendment application to the Coastal Commission staff to begin the process to certify the board's LCPA. So that began a series of negotiations about the application beginning in earnest in February 2019, which extended until June of this year. And in June, the board, as you're aware, makes its budgetary decisions about the Long Range Planning Division work program when it makes its budgetary decisions about the overall county budget and the Planning and Development Department's budget. And given limited staffing resources and other priority projects in the work program, and given that we were not making progress with the Coastal Commission staff with regard to the negotiations of certain modifications, which I'll explain in a minute in this presentation, the board decided to not fund continued activities within this fiscal year on the local coastal program amendment application and reconsider starting it possibly in the next fiscal year. So the fiscal year starts on July 1st. So unfortunately, thereafter, we received information from the Coastal Commission staff, and they clarified that they would not allow the LCPA application to expire, and instead, they would be taking our application to the Coastal Commission for consideration in September, unless we, the county, withdrew the application. Now, this timing was unfortunate because given the fact that we learned of this in the end of August, the Coastal Commission hearing was scheduled for September. Planning Director Plowman did not have the opportunity to take this back to the Board of Supervisors to get board direction as to whether or not she should withdraw the application or should allow the application to proceed. So fortunately, she was able to glean enough information to get to feel confident that she had at least 3 board members who would support a withdrawal of the application, and therefore she officially withdrew the application in September before the Coastal Commission hearing. So what was it, the subject of disagreement? So we had, the Coastal Commission staff recommended about 20, and they are multi-part modifications, depending on how you count them. They are about 20 of them there. Out of those, we, P&D staff, felt that we could recommend to the board that they support 4 of the modifications, either as the staff proposed it or after some negotiations with staff to modify the modification to make it acceptable, at least to us, staff, to recommend that the board approve it. However, there's 16 revisions that would be, there'd be about 16 of the modifications that would require revisions in order to gain our support at this point. And if you look at those, there's about 6 general areas or issues that constitute significant disagreement, and it involves about 12 of the modifications. So if you take a look at the planning director's letter to the Coastal Commission that was submitted to you for this hearing today, you'll see that that organization of that letter generally follows the following slides I'm going to provide you. So you could just follow along looking at that letter if you wish. So the first area of disagreement involved the suggested modifications 4, 11, and 13. And it involves the Public Resources Code, or Coastal Act, Section 30235. And this is the policy that governs when local jurisdictions shall allow shoreline protection structures. And I'm paraphrasing the law, but generally when you read that section, it says that in the event that there is no other environmentally superior alternative, we shall allow shoreline protection structures in order to protect existing structures or existing development more generally. It is a shall statement, it's not a should or may. So it's an important policy, and I want to make it clear that we would only be considering a shoreline protection structure in the event that it is shown that it is truly the environmentally superior alternative. So it's really a last resort option for when you are in a dire situation, and unfortunately, those situations we are going to be allowing shoreline protection to protect existing structures pursuant to what the Coastal Act says. So what becomes very important is that definition of existing development. Coastal Commission staff reads this section of the Coastal Act and interprets it to mean that existing development is only development that existed as of January 1st, 1977. That is the effective date of the Coastal Act. However, there is nothing of the sort in the Coastal Act that makes a clarification like that. We have done our research. We even found an Attorney General's opinion which provided guidance on this on a case back in the early 2000s, which supports our interpretation, which is no, as the board adopted it, development would have been development existing as of the sea level rise LCPA effective date. And when we got to the point where we could not agree on a compromise or something of that sort, or we could not convince, I should say, the Coastal Commission staff that they should adopt the board's interpretation, Coastal Commission staff offered a compromise, and that was just to stay silent on this issue. Now, from our perspective, that is staff's perspective, if you look at the most basic objective of this project, it's to provide clarity, that is, provide clear expectations about what the regulations in fact say or what we're requiring people to do. And that's important not only for the property owners, but for us as staff when we're administering these laws, and ultimately people understand what the regulations are intended to mean. So if you stay silent, that is going against that objective. You're not providing clarity on the matter. Actually, that would end up in just the status quo where we would have this disagreement, and on a case-by-case basis, we'd have to, through appeals, try to resolve this issue. So that's not an efficient way to do business. We don't think it's fair to our customers, and therefore we don't support that currently.
Dan, I just wanted to add one thing, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. We think that this is probably something that's going to have to be addressed by the state legislature, because there are a number of agencies that are having similar problems with this interpretation that's currently being made by Coastal Commission or Coastal Commission staff. So that's probably something that's going to be sorted out outside of our oversight, but would certainly be helpful once they do get that sorted out.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Director Plum. And in a little bit, I'll explain some state level efforts that are also in the works to try to resolve that too. Okay, so the next area of disagreement involves modification number 15, and once again, it involves the Coastal Act section 30235. And it involves basically the Coastal Commission staff wants to require property owners as a condition of all coastal development permits for new development that the property owners waive their right to any future shoreline protection pursuant to Coastal Act section 30235. However, we don't support this. As I mentioned earlier, we don't want to take any tools or options away from future decision makers in the event that they have to deal with coastal sea level rise, and especially given the language of the Coastal Act, which says we shall allow for these shoreline protection structures in certain situations. The next area of disagreement involves suggested modification 19. And in this case, the Coastal Commission staff wanted to apply a condition to the coastal development permits for shoreline protection structures such that they would require a reassessment every 20 years. And although we support the monitoring of shoreline protection structures to ensure that they remain effective, coastal development permits do not have fixed terms. They don't have time limits. They run with the land. And more importantly, we want the evaluation and assessment of the adequacy of a shoreline protection structure to be based on actual on-the-ground conditions. That is, the CDP should remain valid until the shoreline protection structures either found to be ineffective or it's no longer needed. That is, it becomes obsolete. And that could be 5, 10, 15, 25 years. We don't know. That's going to be dependent on the actual events that occur. So we were not supportive of this modification. The next area of disagreement involves suggested modifications 6 and 14. And in this case, the Coastal Commission staff was requesting that there be a mandatory minimum setback from coastal bluff edges for new development, which would be a minimum of 25 feet. When we asked Coastal Commission staff where the 25-foot setback from where it was derived, they indicated that it's not based in science or engineering. There's nothing like that to support it. It's more a matter of providing them with certitude or confidence that the development is set back sufficiently. However, the way the board's LCPA was set up was that the determination for the appropriate setback for development would be based upon a site-specific geological and engineering study, which would be subject to the chief building official's review and approval. We believe that's much more accurate. It provides the substantial evidence to support a development setback. And although we understand and can empathize with the kind of lack of certitude about what may occur in the future, unfortunately, we didn't feel that was a sufficient basis on which to apply this minimum setback requirement. All right, next area of disagreement involved modifications 2, 3, and 6. And it had to do with how we would adopt best available assignments or changes to our LCPA based upon new knowledge that becomes available. I want to make it explicitly clear. The board's LCPA was set up such that we would adjust, for example, our sea level rise scenarios when we got new best available science that indicated we should do so. However, what we believe is appropriate, that is, the process by which you make that change should and must occur through the LCPA amendment process. So in other words, the Coastal Commission staff expected that immediately upon the Coastal Commission's determination about what is the new best available science, they expected local jurisdictions to immediately use those new standards without going back and amending their local coastal programs to reflect those new standards. So we believe that's inappropriate. We believe that the board needs to weigh in and agree that that's the best available science. And then second, we need to go through that LCP certification process so we make it clear in our LCP what that new standard is. Okay, the last, I believe, area of disagreement involves suggested modifications 5 and 15. Similar to some of the earlier mods, this one involved what would be a requirement from the CC staff where They wanted a condition placed on CDPs, which would require the removal, relocation, or modification of development if effectively new shoreline protection is required to protect that development. Similar to what I said earlier, for many of the same reasons, we don't believe it's appropriate to limit options for future property owners to protect existing development. We think it's in violation of COSOC 30235, or could be in certain situations. And ultimately, it's a matter of protecting the public health, safety, and welfare. And when you take one of those tools or options away from decision makers to address the types of hazards we're going to see in the future, we don't believe that's good public policy. So for those reasons, we didn't support this one. So what are the next steps? Well, negotiations are continuing. Director Plowman is in conversations with the executive director to try to resolve some of the points of disagreement, so we'll see where that goes. In addition, you might be aware that the state recently adopted Senate Bill 1, which established a new sea level rise state and regional support collaborative, and this is going to consist of appointees from the governor who are assigned to come up with administrative guidelines to provide guidance to local jurisdictions with regard to the various sea level rise requirements and what should be adopted in our local coastal programs. What I'll say with regard to this is that this is not a new approach. Coastal Commission has adopted similar types of administrative guidelines in the past. What becomes unclear, though, is what force and effect such guidelines have on future development or new applications, because what has happened in the past is the Coastal Commission staff has treated such guidelines as the actual adopted law, that is, with the same force and effect as the Coastal Act or the California Code of Regulations for the administrative procedures. So it creates a lack of clarity with regard to the expectations, but we'll see where that goes. Also, there are other administrative guidelines on which the Coastal Commission staff is working. For example, there's draft guidelines that were just recently completed with regard to critical infrastructure. So we'll rely on those when analyzing projects. And then ultimately, the board may fund us to continue with the LCPA application either in the next fiscal year or, excuse me, in future fiscal years. It's really up to them. And I think that decision will be based, at least in part, on how far Ms. Plowman can go with regard to the negotiations with the Coastal Commission staff. So with that said, the recommended actions for you today is to receive and provide any commentary on the report I just provided to you, and also to find that this report and your actions today do not constitute a project pursuant to CEQA, State CEQA Guidelines Section 15378B5. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have.
Commissioner Senauer.
Yeah, thank you very much for this overview. There's a lot of moving parts to this. First of all, since this has been withdrawn, since our amendment has been withdrawn, what is the status quo now? What is the existing language, et cetera, and ordinance?
Chair Kupiak, Commissioner Senauer, with regard to what specific issue in terms of, for example, how we're currently analyzing sea level rise scenarios and applying it to new development, or is there a specific?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, good question. What's interesting is that in practice, we're really kind of following what the board was proposing in some important ways. So for example, property owners must come in and, using various sea level rise scenarios, demonstrate how they have designed new development such that it will avoid having to rely on shoreline protection in the future in order to protect it from the hazards that are associated with sea level rise. Right now, we're kind of following the Coastal Commission's lead because we're trying to avoid these projects getting appealed to them. So we'll go to the Coastal Commission staff and we'll say, okay, what is the best available science in terms of the sea level rise scenarios for which we should be planning? providing that information to the applicants, and then the applicants can go ahead and do the analysis and hopefully avoid an appeal of our decision to the Coastal Commission due to it being designed inaccurately in their opinion, or perhaps when it comes to the conditioning of CDPs to waive rights to future shoreline protection structures. What we're finding is that some property owners are choosing to voluntarily impose that or accept that condition on the CDP in order to avoid their CDP application being appealed to the Coastal Commission. So although we're not currently mandating it, property owners are strategically trying to avoid an appeal and voluntarily accepting these conditions. So things like that are going on. It's a lot of muddling through, and it takes a lot of time in negotiation with Coastal Commission staff because, for example, we have standing roughly quarterly meetings at which we'll present some of these project applications and present questions about projects to try to get direction from them about what will be found to be acceptable. And it takes time and it takes money to do so.
I have a very 30,000 foot question. Okay. What is the county's consideration separate from the Coastal Commission of managed retreat?
I'm sorry, the specific question, what's our consideration? Sorry.
Yeah. Do you consider an approach of managed retreat vis-a-vis adaptation management?
Great, thank you for the clarification. So Commissioner Sanara, through the chair. Yes, so the way the board's LCPA was set up, managed retreat, that is soft methods or for adaptation, would always be the first option that you would seek to try to resolve the issue. And in many areas, we are afforded the opportunity to allow for that to occur. However, particularly in urban areas where you have existing development and the potential opportunities for managed retreat do not exist, in those particular situations, we would, the way the LCPA was set up, we would then start to consider alternative options that are not as environmentally benign as managed retreat. So if you want another way of looking at it, it's kind of like a tiered structure in the sense that where you can do managed retreat in adaptation in that fashion, that's what you do. But if the existing development patterns don't make that pragmatic or practical for whatever reason, then you go to another option. So we're fully supportive of managed retreat, and that's how the LCP was set up, but we're just trying to acknowledge the reality that you can't do it everywhere along this coastline practically.
Okay, and to that regard, property rights come into play, is that correct? In other words, you have a property on the coast, on a bluff, and managed retreat, how does that fit in? It's, it's horns of the dilemma, really. And I'm just wondering how the county deals with that. If something is vulnerable, if a property is vulnerable, where there is no dictate that you have to retreat, correct? You can stand your ground and do basically protections like a seawall, et cetera. I'm trying to get where the county sort of will say, you know what, can the county sort of say you're in harm's way? Or is it always, a battle? It's your property, it's your right to have this, it's zoning, all of it. Is there any, where does the movement occur as far as protecting public health and safety, i.e. a homeowner, vis-a-vis their property rights to have this build or whatever on this parcel that is obviously in harm's way of sea level rise? Either the toe of the bluff is getting degraded right? And therefore the bluff is basically vulnerable to collapse. I'm trying to figure out where it comes
Commissioner
down.
Centauer?
Yes.
I'm
I'm sorry. Am I all over the place?
No, but I think I have a good example for you.
Thank you.
And that's Isla Vista.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That is a perfect example where
Mhm.
you see the bluff eroding.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have done out in Isla Vista is we've worked with property owners, but where they are in harm's way, they have to cut their buildings back.
Okay.
There's a certain distance that they have to be set back from the bluff edge. And as that bluff erodes and retreats, they then either they have to cut their buildings back or they can't occupy them. So there is
a standard.
There's a standard, and there's a role that we play when things are not safe, and we can red tag a building through our building division to prevent people from going in there. In the areas where you've got retreat and it's not critical, maybe down on Padaro Lane or something like that, and they want to armor their bluff, then it's a trickier question, right? And then in those situations, the Coastal Commission will probably get involved and there'll be a discussion about whether or not it's warranted. So it's really on a case-by-case basis, but we do have the ability to say, look, your property is no longer safe. We will red tag it until you make these changes to it so that it becomes safe.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. I'll hold my further questions, let others go. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Police.
I have probably more questions than I could venture to offer and possibly wouldn't get the answers anyway. But, the blue line that was established, I don't know who established it, was Heal the Ocean, whoever it was, it showed a lot of vulnerability, especially in the city of Santa Barbara. And I'm just wondering, is the county working in concert, for example, with the city? Is there, because, when we've tried to work in a planning commission, it didn't seem to work very well, just trying to talk about a, roundabout at Olive Mill. And this is a huge topic, as well as the fact that it's a moving target. I mean, the science is changing daily. You said in your report, there's 200 to 300 properties that become non-conforming if follows certain standards. So and what comes up for me, because I've built freeways, is that the freeway that we're about ready to spend a few $100 million on at Olive Mill is not going to sustain, much than 20 years, if at all the science says we're the level of height of change of the water level or the ocean level. So there's so many issues that are presented if we have our clear eyes open regarding how we're going to be affected. So I just wondered, is there a science that we're going to adhere to? Is there some official data that tells us what to expect 10 years from now, 20 years from now? And how do we protect ourselves now for those changes that we know are probably going to happen sometime in the not too distant future? I know that's a kind of nebulous question, but I can put it out there. Maybe someone or the illustrious planning director can comment on, or somebody else.
Dan, do you want to start? And I can.
Yeah, sure. Commissioner Pliche, through the chair. You kind of just described what this whole project was about. So in all seriousness, when it comes to, for example, the best available science, that was what I was talking about earlier with regard to as the science evolves and we get better predictions about sea level rise, we get better data, we would be revising the sea level rise scenarios to show those properties that will be subject to hazards associated with sea level rise, and then they would be responsible for designing any new development according to these new standards. And I kind of want to go back to Commissioner Centauer's question because it kind of relates, because I think there's an important distinction made between existing development and new development. we've focused a lot of this discussion, this presentation today upon existing development, because that's where a lot of the disagreements with Coastal Commission staff reside. But we're mostly in agreement on most of the other changes when it comes to new development. With regard to new development, must always be designed such that you don't need shoreline protection in the future, right? And it's only and if you can meet that standard, then we can approve the CDP for new development. If, in the unfortunate event in the future, it so happens that sea level rise is more intense than what was anticipated when designing the structure, the Coastal Act says, in that case, if you can demonstrate that it's the most environmentally superior alternative, as a last resort, in so many words, you may consider and you shall allow shoreline protection when it's shown to be needed for existing development. So it's a different standard, than for the existing development, which we're focusing on. And you just got to look at this differently between the urban versus rural areas. They present different opportunities with regard to how we can approach sea level rise, new development, and then also protect existing development. And you're always going to have shoreline protection in urbanized areas.
Can I interrupt you for a second? Can I interrupt you for a second? I just want to also just state the fact that we've had this information, a version of it, since 2007, I think it is.
That's the one that brought on.
Yeah, and as well as the fact that we've rejected some of those general future projections as far as water levels because of fear of loss of value of our properties and tax valuation. So it just seems like, are we going to be able to agree on what the science tells us? And can we project what the science would reveal 10 or 20 years out? Otherwise, this exercise is it a political exercise and not necessarily a science exercise? That's my question in a nutshell. Thank you.
I mean, Commissioner Police through the chair, there are, I'm going to forget, Dan, if you can remind me where we derived the information from on sea level rise. The name is not on the tip of my tongue, but we are using a standard that's being used statewide for determining sea level rise. But you're sort of asking a really big question that ties to not only what are we going to do about what we think is going to happen, but sort of what are we doing to stop what we think is going to happen, right? And that's the climate one climate effort that the CSD is overseeing right now on our climate action plan. So if we want to try and arrest what's happening, there are going to be steps that are going to have to be taken where we reduce, carbon emissions, et cetera, so that we don't hopefully see the level of rise that is expected at this point in time. And, these are obviously discussions that world leaders are having, right? About how we're going to address this problem. So, I mean, we do work with standards that other jurisdictions in the state are working with and are trying to develop programs that provide some clarity for our residents in our community about what we expect to see happen. And as Mr. Clement mentioned, that's going to change over time. And then we'd like to have the board approve those changes as we go forward. But I think there's no real crisp answer to your question because there's so much that's unknown and we have to be doing things on the front end to try and prevent it. And then we're doing this work on now so that our community members have an idea of what it is they're going to be able to do or what they should be doing with new development.
Okay, I hear that, but I just to what we do know right now, the changes that we're 90% certain are going to occur in the next 10 years, are we taking that in consideration for, for example, the spending of our public funds on depressed freeways, or allowing permits to continue on coastal properties that otherwise look different 10 years from now? I mean, do we have anything that takes those blinders off and says we can't do that unless we do X, Y, and Z? Maybe this.
Yeah,
Can I interrupt for a second, Lisa? You know, I came onto the Planning Commission just about the time that this conversation was kind of really heating up about what standards we should be adopting in terms of climate, sea level rise. So we're 7 years later. I mean, do we look at the science again? Have we learned anything in 7 years? Are our expectations of what we had 7 years ago the same as they are today? Or has the science indicated something different? Has sea level risen more than we thought it would in the last 7 years?
Actually, Chair Kupiak, I can weigh in there.
Great.
Actually, so when there have been a number of sea level rise models that have been prepared by a number of different entities, but according to the sea level rise scenarios that we originally modeled, this was a great opportunity, one of the few opportunities from an extended project timeline. That is, we actually got to see real-time data to check our models. And what we found was that sea level rise was actually increasing at a moderate level that our original staff recommendation would have, all the policies would have been based upon that scenario. However, the board took a more conservative approach and accepted a lower risk, more extreme sea level rise scenario and ran with that. And then since then, the Coastal Commission staff has said, now the standard's up here. So, but the data shows the actual sea level rise has not increased according to either the board's adopted scenario or the Coastal Commission's more severe scenario.
So it's been less.
It's been less. It's not as extreme.
That's the 7-year snapshot.
Roughly. That was the data available at that time.
And Dan, can you provide the source of the information on sea level rise, the name, the agency that's prepared that?
Excuse me. So I was referring to the scenarios that we prepared.
Right. But there was what the Coastal Commission was recommending that we be adopting, and we agreed to using a particular standard.
It's the ICP, the International Coastal.
That's the name I'm forgetting.
Ocean Protection Council.
There you go. Thank you. Oceans Protection Council.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd like to throw out a thank you to Miss Evilsizer Whitney, always being on the spot with good information like this.
Great. Commissioner Miller.
I wanted to thank long-term planning staff for the hard work on this process. As to the extent that you outlined kind of disagreements you all had with the Coastal Commission about future planning, I just want to clap and cheer you on for the positions you're taking. I think that provides the flexibility that our county needs. And so if there are those who are tossing arrows at you for that, I want to weigh in on the good job side of that one. I'm curious, best available science is a wonderful kind of conceptual notion, but to a certain extent, especially in emerging fields, that may be a hard thing to define. There may be very thoughtful and well-built competing theories out there. I know that in other contexts in state and federal law, people throw around a definition of best available control technology for pollution concerns. Is there a state or federal definition of warehouse or guidebook for what is best available science at any given time? Or is that a determination of either long-term planning staff or of the Board of Supervisors? You all are smart and talented people. I'm just that to be adjudicating between competing models of what best available science might be a difficult challenge either now or in the future, if thoughtful scientists are disagreeing in thoughtful ways. So I'm curious. So to catalyze my question is is best available science a term of art with a definition that is coming from state or federal? With the Miss Avelizer, who came up with the council on that? Is that I apologize if I mispronounced your last name, by the way. Is that a affirmative choice after research that planning has said, like, we think this is the gold standard we should be using, or is best available science a state definition and legal term of art that directs us to that as a source?
Yeah, so Commissioner Miller, through the chair. Very good question. The short answer is there's no officially adopted best available science. It is evolving. There are definitely organizations such as the Ocean Protections Council who are looked at as authorities on the matter. So, for example, the Coastal Commission's recommendation is based upon that organization's recommendations and the science that they use to build their recommendations. This kind of gets back to what I was talking about earlier in my presentation about how the state has adopted that SB1, which is that new law which would establish that new group of appointees to provide the guidance on what is the capital O official best available science. In theory, that's what they're supposed to provide. But no, there is no official standard that's adopted. Because it's evolving, we got to kind of take our cue from what the Coastal Commission has accepted as best available science and then advise applicants to design their applications according to what their current interpretation is in order to avoid an appeal. So the purpose in this project was to establish what that best available science is at any given point in time. And when it changes, what we were proposing is that you go through the LCPA process to amend our codes and standards to reflect that new best available science. There is no official standard, is the short answer.
Okay. Commissioner Keller. I'm sorry, Marshall, you have some more to add?
So
I want to cut you off.
Mostly I want to understand the intellectual framework here. So let's assume some savvy tortured genius down at UC San Diego comes up with a radically different model of sea level rise that disagrees with scientific consensus, but by golly, he may be right. I don't, kind of a Galileo sort of moment in a topic like this. What would be, if we have, like, if these are radically different numbers that project over the next 20 years, how do we, I feel like it's an awkward thing to put planning staff in the situation of trying to assess robustness of models, or not that you all aren't talented, but that's a tough place to be. So would we kind of stick with this methodology and this organization unless they changed, or I appreciate the desire for flexibility and the idea that new data and new information is going to inform how we do this, but how do we avoid being kind of locked in on on one model without, where does that flexibility come from, and where does the kind of model robustness evaluation happen going forward?
Yeah, Commissioner Miller, through the chair. I mean, ultimately, it's a policy decision, right? And that the policy decision is always left up to the chief legislative branch in local government, which is the Board of Supervisors. They have ultimately the unenviable position of determining this is the best available science. What we would do is, when making our recommendation, we would consult experts. So what we did, for example, what I didn't mention in my presentation about the development of the vulnerability assessment is that we also brought together a team of experts, researchers at UCSB, climatologists, those who are studying this issue to advise us as to what is or should be considered the best available science. So we would likely go to those folks, say, okay, what do you think about this? What are you hearing based upon your research and your field of study right now? And then we would base our recommendation to the board accordingly. And then the board ultimately has the determination if they want to go with that or something more conservative, if like the UCSD researcher that you hypothetically described presented a more convincing argument, or members of the public felt like it was a better scenario to use, they would have the opportunity to pitch their case to the board, and it's ultimately the board and then Coastal Commission certification.
Thank you.
Commissioner Police.
Yeah, so there was a name that Professor Bruce Karen at UCSB, he's the one that made their determination back in 2007. And the other comment you made, much as I respect the idea that we've matched the projections to date, the real projections are what's going to happen from now on out. I mean, the ice is going to melt. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And I just wondered if the county has, 3 or 4 years ago, I mentioned to Caltrans to modify their pump design so that the low flow areas of the Olive Mill freeway underpass could be taken care of. And they've made some minor modifications, but there's no way that if you would know what you know today, you would build a freeway that's lower than ground level, let alone be even at that level. But we have a problem, I believe, in that we're about ready to spend about $250 million to put a freeway that's going to be possibly flooded by sea level change. And it's almost too overwhelming to consider that modification. But theoretically, I think that we're in trouble if we accept the fact that we're going to build a freeway that's subterranean at this time and age that we're in. So I just want to make that sort of, not to mention there's 100 projects like that are private, but from a public perspective, that's the biggest one. And I think we need to look at that again. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller.
Well, I have great respect for those of you who are debating the much bigger issues, but I also feel as though it's a moving target. And we're going to just have to be able to adjust as well as we can as the new data and new science comes to play. So I was just dealing with the existing memorandum and Ms. Plowman's letter. And you do say here that you are going to address the most significant concerns that you've addressed, but I noticed that you left out a series of concerns about stability and structural integrity. That wasn't addressed in your letter. And was that not something you felt was significant? That was policy 3 modification, suggested modification, I think number 6. Well, I'm sorry, on the page 2 of 9, there's CLUP policy 338, 39, 310, and 312. And on 39 and 312, you don't support it because of the, you say that the structural integrity, stability and integrity is outside the scope of a site-specific coastal hazard report. So is that why you disagree, or are there other reasons? And why did you not include that in your letter?
Madam Chair, I'm currently in search of my letter. I don't have it printed out on my desk right now. But if Mr. Clement wants to hazard a response, he can start, and then I'll grab the letter so I can get a look at it.
You gotta give me a moment because I gotta pull up the document.
It looks like number 6. There's a whole number of things that come under concern number 6 that is not included. Well, to the extent the best available science is included, but number 6 all has to do with site-specific determination. of stability and structural integrity.
Commissioner Keller, through the chair. Excuse me, could you please just point me to specifically where you are so I can make sure that I'm going to comment?
Okay, I'm on page 2 of the what you have, what was attached with the county staff responses. And on page 2, it says that under CLUP policy 39, that you do not support it because they talk about the coastal
Oh, okay. Yes. Oh, excuse me. So the point of this was that this policy is really supposed to just be talking about the integrity of structures, that is engineering design. Whereas what the Coastal Commission staff wanted us to add is they wanted us to consider, quote, that adequate public or private services and resources will be available to serve the proposed development over the anticipated life of the development and blah, 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 blah. That is already addressed as part of an existing policy in the coastal land use plan. So if you were to add, first off, it doesn't really make sense to add it to this policy because it's really a different issue that they're addressing. And second, you don't need it because there are already existing policies which require that we must find that there are adequate public or private services and resources to serve the development. That is everything that they added us to, they request us to add here. In other words, it would have been excessive and redundant and it was unnecessary. And would provide confusion because you would have been addressing the same issue in 2 different locations in a slightly different way, and it makes it unclear as to how to enforce that.
Right, it says it is, they are outside, well, anyway, you say these modifications are outside the scope of a coastal hazard report. It's just that then it wasn't covered in Ms. Plowman's letter. And so I wondered if that was just because you felt it was less important or you were just picking and choosing the areas that you wanted to point out your disagreement with the Coastal Commission and you didn't want to include everything so as not to overload them.
No, and I should clarify that although the body of this letter focuses on those 6 general issue areas that I addressed, the purpose in providing this attachment was to itemize each and every area of disagreement that's still outstanding to make it clear that it wasn't just those 6 areas of disagreement that were holding up our support for it.
Right, but you didn't bring them to the Coastal Commission's attention because you felt that the 6 that you pointed out were sufficient.
And
not really sufficient. They're the most
critical,
most important,
extreme, yeah, and the ones on which we're having the most difficulty coming to some agreement and present some of the most fundamental policy decisions, policy disagreements.
Okay, in that regard, I'm a little confused with the suggested modifications 5 and 15, removal of shoreline protection is needed. I see county staff do not support modifications intended to preemptively limit future options, but the language appears to me to require development to be removed, relocated, or modified. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear in the conflict between what they proposed and what you are objecting to.
Yeah, Commissioner Kelly, through the chair, what I would say is that when we were negotiating these modifications, we got to a certain point in the negotiations, and I would guess that we could probably, with more negotiations, we could probably get them to make those changes and make that happen. But we got so far in our negotiations, and to be perfectly honest, we ran out of money and time. And as I mentioned earlier, the board defunded us, so we couldn't really continue on with the negotiations to get there. But I agree, we could probably modify the language to create something that would be acceptable to us, because for us, the real problem with that language has to do with the removal of structures, because it's pretty much assumed that you will be doing adaptation. And there will be, for example, removal of development at some point in time, and it's going to occur. But it's just the way the policy was being proposed to be specifically worded. We had some problems with it. We could see some scenarios that it may be problematic, but we probably could have negotiated something to get compromise language that would be acceptable.
I see. I just was confused because you talk about preemptively limiting future options. And so you're saying that the Coastal Commission's modifications would have required development to be removed, relocated, or modified. That's you're talking about in the future.
Exactly. And then keep in mind Coastal Act, Public Resources Code 30235, where it says we shall allow shoreline protection structures to protect existing structures. It creates kind of a policy dilemma there that you'd have to resolve. So I think we could negotiate something, but we're not there yet.
So, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, I just want to add that, we're going to be, the board will next fiscal year likely provide funding for us to continue with these negotiations. The board is supportive of the county adopting these coastal resiliency policies and making sure that we're prepared for sea level rise. But there's work to still be done. And the primary issues that we called out were the ones that were the stickiest and the most troubling. And those are the ones that we are meeting with the Executive Director, Jack Ainsworth, on. So where there are other points of disagreement that were sort of at a lower level, we will continue to work on those when we meet with staff, but it'll have to be next fiscal year.
Yeah, I understand that. And I just wanted to say, to echo what Commissioner Miller said, I think that the choices, the areas you've chosen to pick your battles are really well selected, and your language and your thinking, it seems very, very reasonable and supportable. And I think that this very clearly lays out the disagreements you have, and I think your suggestions really ring true. So thank you for the good work and for the presentation.
Yeah, and I really want to extend my thanks to the staff in long range planning. They worked really hard on the development of this program and worked very hard to try and negotiate some of these modifications so we could get to a point of acceptance. And we just weren't able to get there with the timing and the funding that we had. But we will, they did a great job, and I know they'll continue to do a great job.
Great. Commissioner Police, I see your hand.
Yes, Mr. Plowman, I'm troubled by the aspect of they lack funding to even process a study with the Coastal Commission. How much money were we talking about that we had to cough up in order to continue this study with the Coastal Commission?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Police, what happened was this dragged on for quite a long time. And we did have employees assigned to this and working on it. And we had expected to have that completed by the fiscal year that started in July. And what happened is the board, because we didn't know what the Coastal Commission was going to do, the board made the decision to say, you know what, we have other very high priority projects and programs that we want the staff to work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait to see what happens with the Coastal Commission, and then we can reinitiate the work on this once in the next fiscal year. It's just our resources are really tight.
Okay, that makes sense. Only thing, I don't know what would be a higher priority than sea level rising, but I understand that the conflict with having the Coastal Commission come up with their lead. But we have examples all around our country, whether it's Louisiana or the Eastern Seaboard, and going all the way back to Europe and the Netherlands, of that there's public policy that has to happen to protect the properties, and it's not an individual case-by-case basis. It's a question of, do we put a seawall up? What do we do in order to protect lowlands? And I just am curious, can I ask you this question? Are you working in tandem with the city of Santa Barbara as well in this?
So Mr. Chair, Commissioner Police, we have been working with other jurisdictions across the state, including the city of Santa Barbara. So County of Santa Cruz, County of Marin, some cities in San Diego, Monterey. So we've been talking with other jurisdictions just about how we're all navigating this particular process and how we're all working with the Coastal Commission staff and what we're trying to achieve. And I think, as Mr. Clemens said, we're waiting to see what SB1 produces, because that is another effort to kind of give guidance on sea level rise from the state. So yes, we are coordinating.
Yeah. And then there was a comment made earlier about, there's data that's going to change things, but we do have long-term projections, 2 or 3 of them that are pretty solid, that are internationally accepted. And they would, if we would overlay that with our county, you would definitely see what's going to happen. It's a question whether it's 8 years from now or 20 years from now, but unless there's some magical carbon being sucked out of the atmosphere, it's going to happen. And like I said earlier, has the county, for example, had communications with Caltrans regarding this future project that we're getting ready to do? Has that, covered any possibility of what may occur over the next 20 years of sea rise? I mean, have we talked to them about that?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Police, we have worked with Caltrans for years over their improvements, right? And we're also working with the Coastal Commission about their critical infrastructure requirements and the level of review. And so Caltrans is actually changing the way they do their review, and analyzing things, the critical infrastructure that includes a fairly conservative sea level rise. And Ms. Evelsizer, or if you're going by Whitney now, your married name, I can say that. You may want to talk a little bit about that, or Mr. Clement may want to talk a little bit about that. But there is a new standard that Caltrans will be agreeing to use as they're assessing projects, particularly related to sea level rise.
Okay, well, we just have one freeway, and it's our only way. As the example was that mudslide. We were just hogtied for 2 weeks. We couldn't do anything. And can you imagine what would happen if this was an ongoing daily issue for us to keep that flooded freeway unflooded by virtue, and if we would have planned for the future and not suppressing it? I know it's a big modification to keep that freeway up at grade, at least, that we have through most of Montecito, but that one area that's so depressed, I think it's such a Achilles heel that I just would hope that we would make some clear-eyed decisions about that. But I'll stop there. There's a million things you could talk about sea level rising, so I'll stop. Thank you.
We're counting on drought getting us first, Ron. So
Chair Kupiak, just a couple of additions in response to Commissioner Police's statements. One is, I did want to share that that is county staff, participates along with the cities within the county on the Regional Climate Collaborative, which our Community Services Department Sustainability Division manages or takes the lead on, because they are developing the Climate Action Plan. And the way that the plan is going to be set up is that it's going to be coordinated with the other local jurisdictions who are participating. So that is one collaborative effort going on. And then second, with regard to the 101 widening project, that was subject to an EIR. They did analyze sea level rise vulnerability, at least according to the Coastal Commission's sea level rise scenarios that were requested at that point in time. So they did do that analysis and design things accordingly. So one last item I should share is that Caltrans District 5 has prepared a climate change vulnerability assessment for our region. That was prepared in 2019, and transportation infrastructure projects are to be designed according to those standards. So that was it.
Just one comment on that. Are you saying that they're adhering to the most acceptable climate change data, and when they come to their decisions, or what is the framework for Caltrans's modifications to their plans as they've had them the last 20, 30 years?
Yeah, so to clarify, at the time at which they conducted the environmental review to prepare the EIR for the project, for the widening project, is that at that time they received guidance on what the Coastal Commission believed is the appropriate standard, and they did the analysis according to that standard. I'm pretty sure that the standards have since changed, though. So whether or not
Yeah, well,
it was
just-
the current
just
state, but
guys-
it was evaluated.
The only thing is that freeway design has not changed over the last 20 years. So there's, I think having our eyes, closed to no modifications, and it's acceptable what they designed 20 years ago is not what we had in mind, but maybe they will make further modifications. It's not built yet, but if we're still in a design stage, so we'll give Caltrans more time, I guess.
Great. Commissioner Senauer.
Yeah, is there a timeline for an extension to the LCPA? In other words, we've withdrawn, we're waiting for funding, but does the CCC require, are there parameters as to when we can then present?
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair, if we wanted to proceed, we would have to submit a new LCPA, but it would basically be what we already prepared, modified a bit based upon, like, let's say we made progress with negotiations with them and we found that we came up with a compromise and the board said, yes, we want you to submit that and proceed with it. Then what we do is we would submit a new LCPA application for certification. And hopefully it could be processed more quickly than the current one, well, the previous one was processed.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you for that update. I have to admit, I have greater confidence in the state of California to do its assessment over sea level change than I do in West Virginia. So I think this is a national crisis, not a local crisis. And although I think we will do our best, how we can affect others to do their best is really part of the plan. I hope for success in this matter. If there are any other questions or comments, thank you for that report. It was very enlightening. I'm hoping for success, that we move forward with a robust plan and continue our conversations with other agencies to help guide them in their wisdom. That being said, unless there is more business on the table, I will conclude this meeting and ask for a motion to adjourn. I don't know if we need a motion to adjourn, but
Mr. Chair, sorry.
Jeff, close out the day.
As I slide in at the 11th hour, we just need to confirm for the record about public comment on this item.
We have no public comment on this item.
And on that note, I think we can adjourn, Mr. Chair.
I think we are done. Thank you all. We will see you in December.
Happy Thanksgiving to all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.